When given a task, we all too often let ourselves become driven by the idea of finishing it. But when Diane Hutton, new to a district FMO position on the Beaverhead National Forest, was presented with a multi-objective, multi-year prescription burn plan that would return a battlefield to its 1870s appearance, she knew patience would be key to success. Diane Hutton graduated with a degree in forestry and began working for the Forest Service as a seasonal in the 1970s. Her interest in fire led her to become involved in the district's prescribed fire program. And with her background as a silviculturist ecologist, she became the fire management officer for a district on the Beaverhead National Forest in 1990. In this video, Diane tells about how she and her crew filled in their knowledge gaps while conducting a multi-objective burn plan.
Really good burn that we did is we do all the burning for the Park Service for the Big Hole National Battlefield. And they asked us to come out and take a look at the battlefield. And we had to look at these old drawings that they had at the time of the battle. I think it was like the late 1870s, 1878. And they wanted us to take the battlefield through a series of burns and over a series of years to take it back to what that landscape looked like historically at the time of the battle. And so we had to save certain trees, because it was the sniper tree, So if you burned that tree up, it was a big deal, and then you had all the teepee rings and all the stuff associated with where the encampment was for the Nez Perce Indians, that you had to protect those things, and then you had to take the willows back to a narrower corridor than what they were, but at the same time not increase the water temperature of the Big Hole River because you have Arctic grayling in there, and then you had the problem of the battlefield is a real windy where the Big Hole River goes through the willow bottom, and so your access wasn't really good, and it was really dangerous. I mean, there's a lot of moose down in those willows, chase you out, and then you have no escape routes because you end up in the river or you get stuck in a big willow patch that you can't get through. So it was great, and then you only had a very narrow area to confine your burn to because you had private ground on either end with no break in the fuel between the private and the battlefield. So that was a really interesting burn. I had this big drawing of the battlefield, and so I just took it out and I started breaking the whole area up into different fuel types. I guess the main thing is, what are the objectives, that I need to meet, because, your prescription parameters are going to be different based on what your objectives are, and so finding out, first what the battlefield wanted in terms of the objective. Trying to burn the willow bottom to where people would be safe, where we would beat the objective of killing most of the old decadent willow and trying to get it to regenerate back, but also preserving all the willows or majority of the willows along the stream course itself and not killing those when the willows were so far gone and had such a huge dead component in it, and going out there on several different days and lighting test fires and going, no, this isn't going to work, and then having to pull everybody off the burn. You're talking 20, 30 people off the burn that had driven from Missoula with smoke jumpers and pulling all those people back and going, no, we're not going to meet our objectives today. It was kind of a trial and error kind of a thing, and I guess not committing to the burn totally until we knew that we could meet those objectives by doing test fires and saying, no, it's too hot, we're going to kill all these willows along the stream bank, and we may decimate the grayling population in the lower 48, so. All right, trying to find out what conditions in terms of relative humidity and wind speed that we needed to burn those willows to accomplish the objectives. Over the other objective of the willows was to just kind of burn off the old decadent stuff, get it to a younger age class so it would look like it did at the time of the battle, since the battlefield hadn't had any prescribed fire on it since the Indians quit burning it, I imagine, in the late 1800s, and so trying to take that back to a younger age class when you had 100 years of fuel buildup, on that site, and then they throw the grayling issue in there at the same time. think the hardest part, I think, for some people is to call off a burn and walk away from it because you're not meeting objectives. And we've been real successful. I mean, our program has been real successful, and we haven't had any major disasters in terms of prescribed fire. I mean, we've lost, 12 acres here and there or something, but we haven't burned up a bunch of houses or anything in our prescribed fire program, and I think we've consistently met our objectives. And I think at the dismay of some of my fire guys, my kids get out there, the engine foremans and the crews, and they get really upset when I pull them off the fire and say we're not meeting our objectives and we have to go home and try it another day. Well, why not? We've got a great fire going. Yeah, that's it. We're going to kill these trees and we can't do it. I mean, there's a reason why these are leaf trees and they need to be alive to be leaf trees. And I think that's kind of frustrating for some of those folks sometimes, but But I think that's an important lesson to teach them. Probably one of the most important lessons to teach those people is know when to not light or know when to go home.
We can only speculate about the number of prescribed fires across the United States that have escaped or did not meet burn objectives because people were reluctant, as Diane Hutton did, to call it off. Canceling a burn after the crew is in place and the first strip fire is ignited can be a daunting experience. One's decision-making process is on public display, and it is easy to become overly self-critical. What will the boss think of the lost startup costs? Will my crew see me as indecisive, without good judgment, too fearful? Shouldn't I have been better at determining whether the burn was inside a good prescription? The process one goes through to make a public decision to call off a burn can be practiced beforehand. With your burning crew at a sand table, draw out your next prescribed burn. Discuss with your crew and your supervisor these key things. What are the warning signs that the burn is not behaving as anticipated? Ask your crew for feedback on how they can help you publicly think through calling off a burn. Discuss with your supervisor the consequences of canceling a burn. Watch the Rick Carlson podcast to see if you can learn fresh techniques to use while constantly updating the burn's progress. Review past escapes or near misses to see, in hindsight, if you should have called off the burn.